It was an ordinary morning when Anna Thomas sat across from her boss in the spacious glass-walled office of one of the largest tech companies in the world. The cool, sleek ambience of the room contrasted with the whirlwind of emotions she was battling inside. The company had just announced a major merger, and with it the arrival of its first-ever black CEO. A man with a stellar track record, a mind as sharp as a razor, and a reputation that spanned continents. His name was James Weston. But for Anna, the announcement didn't come with the excitement or reverence that it did for most people. Anna had lived in a world where things didn't always seem fair. She had witnessed inequality and racism in small, often unnoticed ways. Subtle, like the slurs whispered behind closed doors or the unspoken rules of who sat at the top of the corporate ladder. And when James Weston had entered the room, ready to shake hands with the leadership team, Anna's hand remained still at her side. Her refusal wasn't overt or vocal, but in that brief moment, she froze. She stared at James Weston, who extended his hand to her with a warm, professional smile. But for Anna, a strange sense of pride and resistance surged within her. She couldn't explain it. She had no intention of being rude, yet she could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she locked eyes with him. Her refusal to shake his hand was a silent act of rebellion against a system she had grown up resenting, a system that had failed her people for decades. The next morning, the world was different. It felt as if the air itself had shifted. News outlets were buzzing. Twitter was ablaze and headlines screamed the unimaginable. $2.4 billion had vanished overnight, gone without a trace, a once thriving empire crumbling into nothing. Anna had no idea that her moment of hesitation, her small act of resistance, had set off a chain of events that would change her life and the fate of an entire corporation forever. Anna Thomas had always been the epitome of dedication, her eyes firmly fixed on the goal she had set for herself years ago. The corporate world had never been kind, but it had never deterred her either. She fought for every inch of progress, clawing her way up the ladder with a kind of determination that left no room for doubt. From late nights filled with numbers and reports to early mornings packed with meetings and presentations, she had earned her place in this world. But beneath her accomplishments, there was a quiet frustration, an unspoken feeling that she could never shake. No matter how high she climbed, Anna could never quite escape the sense that she was an outsider, watching from the edge, never truly invited into the inner circle. It wasn't something she had ever voiced aloud, but it was a gut feeling that clung to her in every room she entered, every conversation she took part in, every decision she influenced. For years she had wondered if it was just a matter of time, a matter of fitting in with the culture that dominated her world. But the answer always eluded her. The more she worked, the more it became apparent that she was playing in a system that was designed for others, for people who looked different from her, who came from backgrounds more aligned with those in power. And then, out of nowhere, came James Weston, the new CEO. He wasn't a figurehead or a placeholder, but someone who had earned every right to take control of the company. His record was impeccable, a successful businessman, an innovative leader, and someone with a reputation that stretched across continents. James Weston was everything Anna had heard about: charismatic, sharp, a man who had risen against the odds to claim his place at the top. But there was something about his arrival that made Anna uneasy. It wasn't that she hated him, no, not at all. In fact, she admired his accomplishments, the way he carried himself, the ease with which he navigated spaces she had once only dreamed of. But he was different. He was black. And that difference, for reasons Anna couldn't fully articulate, made everything more complicated for her. It wasn't something she had ever openly acknowledged before, not even to herself. But as James Weston walked into the room that morning, his confident stride and hand extended for a formal greeting, Anna couldn't shake the weight of his presence. The moment felt monumental, as if the power dynamics she had grown up understanding, those unspoken rules of who belonged and who didn't, were shifting right before her eyes. She had spent her entire career fighting for recognition, often feeling like she had to be better than everyone else, simply to be seen. But now James Weston, this man so visibly different from the people she was used to seeing in power, was about to take the reins of the very company that had been her life for the past decade. Her heart began to race as James's hand extended towards her. The room had fallen into a sort of hushed anticipation, Everyone else had risen to their feet, eager to shake hands with the new CEO, to affirm their place in this new chapter of the company's life. But for Anna, the simple gesture of a handshake felt like a heavy burden. In that moment, her mind spun in 1,000 directions: fear, doubt, anger, and something else she couldn't name. It was as if the walls around her were closing in, and all of her past frustrations, years of working twice as hard, of never being quite accepted, flooded her in an overwhelming wave. She froze. Her eyes locked onto James's hand, still extended toward her. For a second, time seemed to stretch, and everything in the room seemed to fade away. She knew what she was supposed to do. She knew the polite thing, the expected thing, was to reach out and shake his hand. It was an innocent gesture, a sign of respect, a recognition of his new position. But as her mind raced, her body refused to move. She couldn't do it. She couldn't bring herself to touch his hand. Something inside her snapped, something deeper than logic, something born from years of watching the world play out the way it always had, where power remained in the hands of people who were not like her. James didn't flinch. His face remained calm, his smile unwavering. But Anna saw it. There was a flicker of disappointment in his eyes, a brief shadow that passed across his face before he shifted his focus to the others in the room. He withdrew his hand gracefully, as if nothing had happened, and turned to greet the next person. The rest of the room stood in stunned silence. A few people exchanged glances, their eyes flickering back and forth between Anna and James, but no one said anything. No one dared to comment on what had just transpired. Anna sat there, her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of the moment settled heavily on her. She hadn't meant to cause a scene, hadn't intended to make things uncomfortable. Yet in her refusal to shake his hand, something had shifted, not just in the room but deep inside her. She didn't know why she had done it, only that it felt like the culmination of years of tension, frustration, and an unspoken resentment that had been building within her for far too long. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Anna tried to focus on her work, tried to ignore the storm of thoughts and emotions swirling inside her. But no matter how hard she tried to concentrate, her mind kept returning to that moment, the way James had looked at her, the way the room had felt so unbearably tense, the way she had denied him a simple gesture of respect. Why had she done it? It wasn't like her. She was never one to act impulsively, never one to be so overtly defiant. And yet, in that fleeting moment, everything inside her had rebelled against the system she had worked so hard to be a part of. And then, the next morning, the news hit. $2.4 billion had vanished overnight. The company's empire was crumbling, and no one knew why or how. But Anna couldn't shake the feeling that her refusal had somehow played a role in this disaster. She didn't know how, but she couldn't escape the thought that something had been set in motion, a chain of events she couldn't stop. And as the rumors spread and the investigations began, Anna found herself questioning everything. Was her moment of hesitation just a small act of defiance, or had she triggered something far bigger than she ever imagined? The ripples from that single moment in the conference room began to spread far beyond what Anna had ever expected. At first it was just whispers, small trivial rumors that seemed harmless, even laughable. The office gossip mill, always on the lookout for the smallest of stories, latched onto her refusal like it was some scandalous betrayal. Anna thought it would blow over, that people would forget about it by the end of the day. But as the hours ticked by, she began to realize that her fleeting act of defiance had ignited a firestorm of its own. By lunchtime, the rumors had gained momentum. It was no longer just a question of whether she had refused James Weston's handshake, but why she had done it. Her colleagues, those who had once been her teammates, her friends, started talking. Some were incredulous, others downright hostile, but everyone had an opinion. In their eyes, Anna had either disrespected the new CEO or made a bold stand against the very system she had long been a part of. Within hours, her refusal had become the centerpiece of the company's internal conversations. The whispers that had started as a quiet murmur soon escalated into a full-blown scandal. By the end of the day, the story had exploded across social media. It didn't take long for the media to pick it up, and when it did, it spiraled into a spectacle. News outlets were filled with breathless headlines speculating about the deeper meaning behind Anna's actions. Some framed it as a calculated act of defiance, a rejection of a system that Anna had silently fought against for years. Others portrayed it as a simple personal slight, a grudge perhaps against the new CEO. Born from bitterness and resentment, the story spread far beyond the office walls, seeping into the business world at large. Analysts pounced on the issue like vultures, debating whether Anna's refusal had been an isolated incident or a reflection of something deeper within the company's culture. Was her refusal indicative of widespread dissatisfaction with James Weston's appointment? Was it a reflection of racial tension simmering just beneath the surface? Was it a conscious decision to challenge the system, to disrupt the status quo, to send a message? As the day wore on, Anna found herself at the center of a media frenzy. She became a symbol, a figure of resistance for some, a symbol of defiance for others. People on both sides of the debate had seized upon her actions, interpreting them through the lens of their own biases. Some lauded her as a hero for standing up to an oppressive system, while others vilified her as a troublemaker, someone unable to accept change. The more the media covered the story, the more Anna realized she was no longer in control of the narrative. What had begun as a small personal decision had exploded into a spectacle that the world was now watching. But there was more, so much more. The morning after the story broke, Anna's world tilted again. The headlines had shifted from her refusal to shake hands to something far more disastrous. The company's financials were in chaos. The unimaginable had happened. $2.4 billion had vanished overnight from the company's accounts. The news spread like wildfire, sending shockwaves through the business world. Stock prices plummeted, and executives scrambled to understand what had happened. The company's leadership was caught in a whirlwind of uncertainty as they tried to determine whether the loss was the result of a cyber attack, an accounting error, or something even more sinister. Internal investigations were launched immediately. The company's executives, once so sure of their financial standing, were now scrambling to protect their reputations. The rumors that had been circulating in the office now seemed to take on a more sinister tone. Whispers of corporate sabotage began to fill the air. Everyone knew that someone had to be responsible for this catastrophe. Was it an inside job? Was there a leak within the ranks? Could someone in the leadership team have sabotaged the company's finances? As Anna sat in her office, watching the chaos unfold, she felt the weight of her earlier actions pressing down on her like a physical force. The guilt gnawed at her. A cold stone lodged in her stomach. Was this her fault? Could her small act of defiance, her refusal to shake James Weston's hand, have somehow triggered the chain of events that led to the company's downfall? The thought was unbearable, yet it clung to her relentlessly. Anna had never intended for any of this to happen. Her actions had been personal, impulsive, a brief moment of rebellion against a system she had long resented. But now she began to realize the extent of the damage her refusal might have caused. Her actions had been seen by some as a challenge to James Weston's authority. And in a company where image and perception were everything, her refusal had become a symbol, a moment that people could point to as the catalyst for the chaos that followed. Days passed, and the investigation continued, but Anna's mind never left that initial moment. She had tried to rationalize her actions, to convince herself that she had done nothing wrong. After all, it wasn't just about James Weston being black. It was about her own struggles with the system, the way she had been overlooked and marginalized for years. Her refusal had been a protest, a tiny act of defiance against a world that never seemed to care about her. But as the fallout from her refusal continued to unfold, Anna realized something that shook her to the core. The true reason behind her hesitation, the deep-seated emotions that had guided her actions, were rooted in something more personal than she had ever acknowledged. It wasn't just about race or privilege. It was about her own unresolved biases, her fears and her struggles with power. In her attempt to challenge the system, she had unknowingly become part of the very problem she had spent so many years fighting against. As the company's future grew more uncertain, Anna found herself at a crossroads. The guilt weighed heavily on her, and she couldn't escape the feeling that no matter how hard she tried, she had set something in motion that could not be undone. The corporate world that had once felt like a battlefield she could conquer now felt like a maze, and Anna was lost in its twists and turns. The whirlwind of confusion and panic within the company seemed to intensify with each passing hour. What had started as a simple merger announcement and the arrival of a new CEO had quickly escalated into a full-blown crisis. The news of the $2.4 billion disappearing overnight hit like a storm, and the once thriving corporation found itself scrambling to control the damage. Internal investigations were launched immediately, with every department being scrutinized, every transaction examined under a microscope. The board of directors, once a symbol of power, now looked like a group of people lost in the face of something they couldn't understand. But amid all the corporate chaos, Anna was slowly becoming aware of something that hadn't occurred to her in the first few days. The whispers were growing louder, and the fingers were beginning to point. The rumors spread through the office like wildfire, with people speculating who could be responsible for such a massive financial loss. Some whispered that it was an inside job, that someone within the company had manipulated the accounts, either intentionally or by accident, to cause the disappearance of the funds. Others suggested that James Weston, the new CEO, was the one being framed. Someone was trying to sabotage his leadership before he had a chance to prove himself. Anna, still reeling from the events of the past few days, couldn't help but listen to these rumors. They gnawed at her mind, making her question everything she thought she knew. Had James Weston really been framed? By whom? And perhaps more importantly, why? The idea of someone orchestrating a conspiracy against him made her uncomfortable. She had never been a conspiracy theorist, but the way things were unfolding so quickly, so chaotically, made her wonder if there was more to the situation than met the eye. For all the turmoil, one thing was clear: James Weston was unshaken. He moved through the office with the same calm composure he had always exuded. His face, though occasionally lined with concern, never betrayed any of the anxiety that must have been swirling inside him. The way he held himself, serene, focused, spoke volumes. James was not someone who crumbled under pressure. Instead, he had a quiet resolve that Anna couldn't ignore. It was almost as if he already knew the storm was coming, that this moment too would pass. Despite the chaos that surrounded them, he never pointed fingers, never sought to assign blame. His leadership was steady, measured, and his approach to the crisis was to bring the team together rather than fracture it further. In a company that had been built on hierarchy and power struggles, James's willingness to remain calm and composed in the face of an almost impossible situation made him stand out even more. He didn't act like a man who was being crushed under the weight of the scandal. Instead, he carried the burden of leadership with a kind of grace that made Anna feel both awe and discomfort. Anna couldn't understand how he was able to maintain his composure. Was he truly unaffected, or was there something else going on, something he wasn't telling anyone? As the days dragged on, Anna found herself increasingly drawn to the idea that James might know something they didn't. He had to have some insight into the situation that no one else had. But what? Why did he remain so calm when everything was falling apart around him? It wasn't long before Anna found herself in a private meeting with him. The investigation was still in its early stages, and tempers were flaring in the boardroom, but James had asked to speak with her alone. As she entered his office, the door clicking shut behind her, she immediately felt the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. "Anna," he began, his voice calm but laced with something deeper, something that Anna couldn't quite place. "I don't blame you for what happened, but I need you to understand that we're all in this together now. The company's future is at stake." For a moment, Anna didn't know how to respond. She had expected anger, frustration, maybe even an accusation. But instead, James spoke with an understanding that took her off guard. He didn't cast blame on her for the refusal, nor did he chastise her for the chaos that had followed. Instead, he seemed almost empathetic. Anna felt a strange pang of guilt shoot through her. She had assumed that he would be angry with her, that he would hold her responsible for the way things had played out. But his tone was nothing like she had expected. "Why aren't you mad at me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if the question itself felt too heavy to ask aloud. She couldn't hide the vulnerability in her voice, and she hated that she sounded so unsure of herself. But in that moment she needed to know. Why, despite everything, was James showing such understanding? James paused for a moment before responding. He seemed to be weighing his words carefully. "Because I understand," he said, his eyes locking with hers. "We all carry our own scars. It's how we choose to heal that matters. His words struck Anna like a bolt of lightning. She had always thought of herself as someone who could move forward, someone who could bury her wounds and push through the pain. But hearing James's quiet wisdom, she realized that she had been carrying her scars in secret, buried deep inside, without ever acknowledging them. "I never meant for this to happen," Anna murmured almost to herself. "I didn't mean to cause so much damage." James leaned forward slightly, his expression softening. "You didn't cause this. The damage wasn't from your actions alone. The systems that allowed this to happen, they've been in place for years. What matters now is how we deal with it, what we do next." Anna felt a deep sigh escape her lips, a tension she hadn't even realized she was carrying lifting slightly. In that moment, the weight on her shoulders didn't seem as unbearable. For the first time since the scandal erupted, she felt as though she wasn't alone in this. James wasn't angry at her. He wasn't blaming her. Instead, he was offering her something she hadn't expected, understanding. He understood that sometimes people make mistakes. They act out of fear, out of frustration, out of years of pent-up emotions. And yet, despite it all, there was room for healing. There was a path forward. For the first time, Anna began to wonder if she could find a way to move forward too. The investigation that had begun in a haze of confusion and uncertainty was now cutting through the corporate world like a knife. Days turned into weeks, and as the dust slowly began to settle, it became apparent that the $2.4 billion hadn't simply vanished. It had been stolen. The feeling of disbelief hit Anna like a wave crashing against a rocky shore. She had watched the company crumble, seen the chaos unfold, but now she was beginning to understand the true scale of the betrayal. What had initially seemed like an unfortunate mistake was, in fact, the result of a highly orchestrated scheme, one that had been carefully hidden in plain sight. As investigators pieced together the trail of evidence, they began to unravel a web of deceit that led straight to the heart of the company. It wasn't a hacker, an external attacker, or some unforeseeable force that had caused the financial disaster. No, the perpetrator was someone within the organization, someone who knew the inner workings of the company better than anyone else. The evidence pointed directly to one of the executives, someone Anna had worked alongside for years, someone she had trusted. The man in question was Richard Thornton, the company's CFO and one of the most influential people in the leadership team. Anna had known Richard for nearly a decade. He had been a mentor to her, someone who had always offered a helping hand when she needed it, someone who had shared his insights with her on more than one occasion. They had worked together on countless projects, and she had always admired his sharp intellect and calm demeanor. He had seemed like the perfect leader, someone whose steady hand could guide the company through any storm. But now the truth was coming to light. Richard had used his position of power to manipulate the system, siphoning off billions from the company's accounts over the course of several months. As the evidence mounted, Anna's mind was flooded with a mix of emotions, disbelief, betrayal, and an overwhelming sense of sadness. She had never suspected Richard. The idea that someone she had trusted so completely could betray her, the company, and everyone else involved was almost too much to bear. Richard had always been the type of person who seemed beyond reproach, someone who had the company's best interests at heart, or so she had believed. But now she saw the cracks in the facade, the manipulation and the lies that had been woven into the fabric of the company's financial structure. It was a revelation that shattered everything she thought she knew about the people she worked with, about the very system she had dedicated her life to. Anna couldn't help but reflect on the conversations she'd had with Richard over the years. She remembered the moments when he had shared his frustrations with the corporate world, the way he had spoken about the inequalities that existed within the company. At the time, Anna had agreed with him. She had felt the same frustrations, the sense that the system was rigged, that the people at the top held all the power while those beneath them struggled to be heard. But Richard had always framed these issues as something to be dealt with, as something to work around rather than something to confront head-on. Now, she realized how much she had underestimated James Weston. Richard had always been part of the old system, the system that perpetuated inequality, the system that made people like Anna feel small, feel insignificant. James had been right all along. The system wasn't just flawed because of his race or because of her struggles. It was fundamentally broken because of the very people who profited from its flaws. The people who were in power, who held the reins, and who kept the status quo intact. Richard had been a perfect example of that system, someone who had gained power and prestige by exploiting its weaknesses, by playing the game to his advantage. He had turned his position into an opportunity to line his pockets, to manipulate the numbers and shift the funds in a way that benefited him, all while the company and its employees suffered the consequences. Anna felt a pang of guilt, a deep, gnawing sensation in her gut. Had she been complicit in some way? Had she unknowingly contributed to the system that allowed someone like Richard to thrive? She had spent so many years fighting to prove herself, working hard to earn her place in a world that had always seemed stacked against her. But in that struggle, had she ignored the deeper issues that were right in front of her? Had she focused so much on individual achievement that she had overlooked the larger systemic problems at play? The realization stung, and Anna was left grappling with the truth she had long avoided. She had been part of the problem. Not because she had stolen, not because she had done anything wrong in the traditional sense, but because she had been complicit in maintaining the system that allowed people like Richard to rise to power. She had been so focused on navigating the system, on fighting for her place, that she had failed to recognize the way the system itself was, designed to perpetuate inequality. As the investigation into Richard's actions continued, Anna found herself at a crossroads. The world she had once thought she understood was now crumbling before her eyes. The corporation she had worked for, fought for, believed in, had been built on lies, and those lies were now coming to light. It was a painful realization, one that left her questioning everything she had worked for. The sense of betrayal she felt was overwhelming, but it was also a catalyst for something much bigger. The question was no longer about how to fix the company. It was about how to fix herself, how to confront the uncomfortable truth that had been hiding in plain sight all along. James Weston, despite his calm demeanor and unwavering leadership, had been right. The system was flawed, not just because of the individuals who were part of it, but because of the way it was built to favor a select few while leaving the rest to struggle. Anna realized now that it wasn't about one person's refusal to shake another's hand. It was about a much larger issue that needed to be addressed if the company and society were ever going to move forward. And so, in that moment of revelation, Anna made a decision. She would no longer be part of the system that allowed people like Richard to thrive at the expense of everyone else. She would fight for change, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been held back by the inequalities she had ignored for so long. It was time to confront the broken system head-on and finally work towards something better. In the weeks following the revelation of Richard Thornton's betrayal, the company found itself at a crossroads. The enormity of the financial loss, coupled with the internal strife that had followed, left many questioning if the company would ever recover. But James Weston, with his quiet yet unyielding resolve, knew that the only way forward was not just through the numbers on a balance sheet, but through the people who made up the very fabric of the organization. His leadership was tested like never before, and yet, rather than retreating or collapsing under the weight of the crisis, James took a different path, one rooted in rebuilding not just the company's finances, but its heart and soul. James understood that to heal from such a devastating blow, the company needed to do more than recover, it needed to evolve. His vision for the future wasn't just about profits. It was about fostering an environment where people could thrive, where diversity was celebrated, and where employees were empowered to bring their full selves to work every day. James didn't just focus on the bottom line, he focused on the people. He encouraged open dialogues, listened to the concerns of the employees, and prioritized creating an inclusive culture where everyone had a seat at the table, regardless of their background, their race, or their position in the company hierarchy. For Anna, watching James lead in this way was a revelation in itself. She had always believed that leadership was about strength, about making tough decisions and achieving results. She had placed so much emphasis on tangible outcomes, profits, sales, growth, that she had failed to see the importance of a supportive, inclusive environment. But as the company slowly began to rebuild itself with James's guidance, Anna started to realize just how crucial these values were. In the beginning, Anna was hesitant. She had spent years navigating a world where power was wielded in ways she had always found uncomfortable. The corporate environment she had thrived in was one of competition, dominance, and performance-driven success. It was a world that had made her feel small, even if she had never openly acknowledged it. But now, in the aftermath of the scandal, and as the company was beginning to embrace James's vision, Anna found herself questioning the very beliefs that had guided her for so long. As much as she admired James's approach, she struggled to let go of her own biases, the prejudices and assumptions that had been deeply ingrained in her throughout her career. She had always considered herself open-minded, but the truth was that her hesitation to accept James as a leader had been rooted in her own reluctance to see beyond the surface. She had been so caught up in her own assumptions about leadership and success that she had never truly given James the opportunity to prove himself. Instead, she had viewed him through a lens tainted by the system she had spent years trying to navigate and survive in. It was a humbling realization. Anna's reluctance to shake James's hand had been more than just a single act of defiance. It had been a reflection of her own internal battles. She had resisted change, resisted the very possibility that someone like James, a black man in a position of power, could be the leader the company needed. And in doing so, she had perpetuated the same system that had kept her, and so many others, marginalized. But now, as James's leadership began to shine through, as the company started to transform into something more inclusive and supportive, Anna realized that the real change had to start with her. As she worked alongside James to implement his vision for the company, Anna felt a shift within herself. The more she observed James's actions, the more she saw how his commitment to inclusivity and empathy was not just a strategy, but a core part of his identity as a leader. He wasn't just making decisions to keep the company afloat. He was shaping a new culture, one where every voice mattered, and where people could rise to their fullest potential without being held back by the limitations of the old guard. Anna's role in the company began to change too. She was no longer just a bystander or a reluctant participant. She became an active force in driving the transformation James was spearheading. Slowly, she found herself in meetings where the voices of people who had once been overlooked were now being heard. She saw team members who had been afraid to speak up finally find their confidence, knowing that their ideas would be valued. She witnessed employees from diverse backgrounds, once relegated to the sidelines, take on leadership roles, bringing fresh perspectives and innovative solutions to the table. Through this process, Anna's own heart began to soften. She started to recognize the power of empathy in leadership, the importance of listening, and the profound impact of creating a space where everyone could succeed, not just the ones who fit into the narrow mold of the old system. The changes within the company weren't just organizational, they were personal. Anna found herself confronting her own demons, acknowledging the biases she had carried for so long, and learning how to dismantle them piece by piece. It was hard. The change didn't happen overnight, and there were moments when Anna doubted herself. She was constantly questioning whether she was doing enough, whether her efforts to create an inclusive environment were truly making a difference. But as time passed, she began to realize that change wasn't about perfection. It was about progress. Every small step, every uncomfortable conversation, every action that pushed her out of her comfort zone was a step toward something better. James had shown her that true leadership wasn't about being perfect or having all the answers. It was about being willing to learn, to grow, and to embrace the uncomfortable process of self-reflection and change. In his leadership, Anna saw the kind of person she wanted to be, someone who didn't just rise above adversity, but who used their position to bring others up with them. As the company continued to rise from the ashes of its past mistakes, Anna realized that the greatest transformation had taken place within herself. She had been given the opportunity to become a part of something bigger than herself, something that could change the way business was done, not just within their walls, but within the industry as a whole. Anna had always believed in her own ability to succeed, but now she understood that success wasn't just about achieving personal milestones. True success was about creating a world where everyone had the chance to rise, where opportunities weren't limited by race, background, or position, but by one's ability to contribute and lead with integrity. And so, with a heart that had softened and a mind that had been opened, Anna stepped into her new role, no longer a bystander in the company's journey, but a leader in her own right. As she worked alongside James, she understood now more than ever that the hardest things to do often brought the most meaningful change. And in the company's transformation, in her own transformation, she had found a new sense of purpose, one that went beyond profits and personal success, one that was rooted in the power of unity, empathy, and inclusion. Months had passed since the storm had swept through the company, leaving destruction in its wake. Yet as Anna walked through the sleek glass doors of the building one morning, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride that the company, despite all odds, had emerged stronger than ever. The once fractured team had found its footing again, and the seeds of change planted by James Weston had begun to take root in every corner of the organization. It wasn't just the financial recovery that was impressive, it was the transformation of the company's culture. Employees were engaged, collaboration was thriving, as there was a palpable sense of purpose that had been lacking before. James Weston had steered the ship through the most turbulent of waters, guiding it with a steady hand and an unwavering commitment to transparency, fairness, and inclusion. His leadership had been tested like never before, but he had emerged as a beacon of strength, humility, and wisdom. Anna couldn't help but admire him. But more than that, she had come to understand him, not as a distant figure of authority, but as a colleague, a partner, someone whose vision she now shared. She had witnessed the profound changes in the company, and she knew that much of the credit belonged to James. Yet, Anna had also changed. Over the months, she had grown in ways she hadn't expected. The walls she had built around herself, those barriers formed by years of working in an environment that emphasized competition and individualism, had begun to crumble. She no longer viewed the workplace through the lens of personal success. Instead, she saw it as a collective effort, a place where people's unique talents and contributions mattered, regardless of their backgrounds or positions. She had become one of James's most trusted allies, working alongside him to implement his vision for a more inclusive and empathetic organization. The resistance she had once felt had given way to collaboration, and in that shift, she had found her true purpose. That morning, as she stepped into the elevator lobby, she was met by an unexpected sight. There, standing by the elevator, was James. His usual calm demeanor was still present, but there was something different in the way he looked at her. His gaze held a quiet intensity, and for a moment the bustling office around them seemed to fade into the background. Without a word, James extended his hand to her. The gesture was simple, yet it carried with it a weight that Anna couldn't quite explain. For a brief second, Anna hesitated. Her mind briefly flashed back to the moment when she had first refused to shake his hand. The doubts, the internal battles, the pride and the resistance that had kept her from reaching out to him then, all resurfaced. But now, as she stood before him, everything had changed. She had changed. She realized that her earlier hesitation wasn't about James, but about the walls she had built around herself, walls that had kept her from fully embracing the possibility of change and growth. This time she didn't hesitate. She reached out and took his hand firmly, feeling the strength and warmth in his grip. The simple act of shaking hands, which once felt like a symbolic gesture of defiance, now felt like an act of unity. As their hands met, something shifted inside Anna, a subtle yet powerful change. It was as if the years of resistance and uncertainty had melted away, replaced by a newfound sense of connection and purpose. "Together," James said, his voice steady, filled with conviction and sincerity. Those two words struck Anna deeply. She had heard those words before, but they had never carried the same weight. Together. It wasn't just about the company's success. It wasn't about her personal triumphs or setbacks. It was about shared vision, shared purpose, and mutual respect. In that moment, Anna understood what true leadership was all about. It wasn't about holding power over others, or forcing people to conform to a singular vision. It was about finding common ground, about building bridges where there were once walls, and about working side by side to create something greater than what any individual could accomplish alone. As she looked into James's eyes, Anna realized that their journey had been far more than just about corporate success. It had been a journey of self-discovery, growth, and transformation. They had started as two individuals who, in different ways, had been trapped by the constraints of a broken system. James, fighting against the racial barriers that sought to limit his potential, and Anna, struggling to navigate a corporate world that had made her feel like an outsider. But now they stood together, not as adversaries, not as people divided by their differences, but as colleagues who had found common ground in their shared commitment to change. Anna smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile as she realized how far they had come. The company was no longer just a place where she worked. It had become a symbol of what was possible when people were given the opportunity to thrive, regardless of their backgrounds or past experiences. It was a place where inclusion, empathy, and collaboration were no longer just buzzwords but values that guided every decision. It wasn't perfect, of course, but it was a place that was moving in the right direction. In that moment, Anna knew that the future wasn't about competing for a seat at the table. It was about making room for everyone at the table. The walls of division had been replaced by the bonds of shared purpose, and in that unity, she saw the promise of something greater. Together, she repeated softly, feeling the weight of the word settle in her heart. And as the elevator doors closed behind them, Anna realized that the journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Together, they would continue to build something stronger, something better, something that could stand as a beacon of hope for others who felt excluded or marginalized. The company had been through a storm, but now with James's leadership and Anna's newfound understanding, they had created something resilient, something that would endure. Together, they would lead the way forward.